Hey everyone, welcome to the fifth episode of the Rivals Connected podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Drew, Saints fan, obviously, with the other host here, Dabir, Momin, a Falcons fan. And today we have two very special guests, Ross Jackson, the host of Locked on Saints, and Aaron Freeman, the host of Locked on Falcons. Guys, thanks so much for joining.
Boo.
This is going to be a good night. I can tell.
Sorry, man. That's my buddy over there. So we get to have fun while we're on your show. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So the first thing, obviously, a lot of moves in free agency in the NFC South, especially from the Falcons and Panthers. But one of the biggest moves was the Saints signing free agent quarterback Derek Carr, obviously locking up their guy for 4 years, and actually getting someone that the Saints wanted in free agency, which is something that they've struggled with over the last couple of years. So what are you guys' thoughts on the signing?
You want to start, buddy?
I mean, you've talked about it a ton, so I guess I'll put my 2 cents on it. I think it made sense for the Saints. They want to get some stability there with someone who's a proven starter that probably we've seen high-level play from, or at least close to high-level play from more recently than Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton. So it does feel like an upgrade for the Saints at the quarterback position. The question is, was the Derek Carr that we saw last year that kind of struggled in year one under Josh McDaniels the aberration? Because prior to that, you saw some really solid play from Derek Carr, where I think he was legitimately one of the 12 to 15 best quarterbacks in the league. And, my question is, is Pete Carmichael the play caller that can get that out of him again in New Orleans? I have my doubts, but, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Aaron's thoughts there. I look at the addition of Derek Carr for the New Orleans Saints as something that is a good start to their offseason. That was a good start to their offseason, right? It's not a complete thing. It's not something that all of a sudden makes them anything more than they were last year. It elevates their quarterback play for sure. I agree with Aaron there. But when it comes to what you're getting with Derek Carr, it's all going to be about how healthy are the pieces around him? Who are the pieces around him? So I think that's what the Saints still have left to answer in terms of like what their 2023 is going to be, because their 2023 is going to be as successful as their health is. And then in addition to that, what other weapons can they add for, the offense? How do they continue to address the losses on defense, things like that? So I like the addition of Derek Carr. I think it's good when a team identifies a quarterback that they want to be their quarterback and go out and get that guy, knowing that that's the guy that they want, as opposed to the backup plan that effectively Jameis Winston turned into when Deshaun Watson was available last season. And so with that, I think that that's always a positive. That's always a plus, but there's still a lot of work left to be done before this team really challenges for the conference. It should challenge for the division, but challenging for the conference is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, obviously it seems like a win now move for the Saints because they have an older roster compared to the other teams, especially the NFC South. They have some of the younger teams, also some of the teams that aren't quite as ready to win now as the Saints are. Obviously the Bucs rebuilding, the Falcons and Panthers having young teams, the Panthers obviously with the number 1 pick. Dabir, you and I talked about all the Falcons signings, especially the people that the Falcons have signed from the Saints, including linebacker Caden Ellis. I think that was the biggest signing that the Falcons took from the Saints. Obviously, we talked about it. You said, you thought it was a great signing. I said he was, having a breakout season last year. Obviously, Falcons able to get him. Dabir and Aaron, what are your thoughts on the Falcons signing Caden Ellis?
You go first. You got it.
I think Caden Ellis, the big knock on the Falcons has been their pass rush, and Caden Ellis, that's what he shined in New Orleans in that breakout year, as you were referring to it. And I think he's going to give the team, some production from that linebacker position, play a similar role that he played under the Saints defensive coordinator or head coach. I'm sorry. But true DC in Dennis Allen, and of course with Ryan Nielsen, the co-DC in New Orleans now will be the DC here in Atlanta. I think Nielsen knows how to get the most out of Caden Ellis, and that was a big thing that attracted him to Atlanta. So I think the pairing of Caden Ellis alongside Troy Anderson, the Falcons' second-round pick from a year ago, who had a kind of up and down rookie season, but did flash some potential there, I think is a good combination for the Falcons at that linebacker position. And both of those guys, probably did their best work rushing the quarterback. And so I expect the Falcons to incorporate an aggressive sort of scheme under Nielsen that will be able to maximize both of those players this year.
Yeah, and like you said, him and Troy Anderson, two very good players. Like Drew said, Caden Ellis had a breakout season. I believe he had 78 tackles last season. So I would love to see him, and I will like to see him on this defensive side of the ball. I like to see how he produces under our defensive coordinator, and hopefully he can have a breakout season like he did in New Orleans. And I think this is a very good move by the Atlanta Falcons in general, getting somebody to rush the quarterback, which we have lacked at that position for the past 5 years.
Yeah, obviously that wasn't even the only player that the Falcons signed from the Saints as well, also signing David Onyemata on the defensive front. So Falcons really stacking up on the defensive side of the ball. They also, added some pieces on offense. They really made some changes this offseason, probably some of the most changes that we've seen from any team in the offseason. So who do you guys think the Falcons are going to target in the draft this year?
Bijan Robinson.
That's the betting favorite right now. It's also been Nolan Smith, the edge rusher from Georgia. I think Peter Skoronski, the Northwestern offensive lineman, is also high on their list. I think the player the Falcons probably truly want to take at 8 is Tyree Wilson, the pass rusher from Texas Tech. But it doesn't sound like Tyree Wilson's going to be there because there's been a lot of building buzz over the last week or two that he might be the second player off the board to the Houston Texans. So if he does somehow manage to slide past Houston and Arizona and Seattle, I think the Falcons will sprint to the podium to continue to enhance that pass rush. But if he's not there, as most people in various sports books seem to think is going to be the case, and I think it'll be down to either Peter Skoronski, Bijan Robinson, and Nolan Smith. And my guess is if the Falcons can move back and get one of those guys, I think they'll be open to that, just because I think the expectation and the perception is, maybe Nolan Smith isn't one of the top 8 players in this draft. Maybe Peter Skoronski maybe fits that bill. And Bijan Robinson, while probably one of the top 5 players in this draft, due to the notion that you can't take running backs high, I think the Falcons would love to move back, maybe pick up a 2nd or 3rd round pick, take the quote unquote luxury pick in Bijan Robinson, and still be able to address some of their needs at some more, premium positions a little bit later in the draft.
Yeah, adding more onto that, like you said, I would personally, in my mock draft, I do have us going Tyree Wilson. I think he is obviously the better option. I believe that he is actually a better prospect than edge from Alabama, Will Anderson. A lot of people might disagree, but I think Tyree Wilson will be a better option for any team in the league. But like you said, I doubt he falls a lot. I think he won't even fall past number 5. Obviously, we have the draft in 2 days, I believe. So I would like to see. I feel like actually Jalen Carter might fall to the Atlanta Falcons, and we go ahead and take him. I personally do not like the Bijan Robinson pick because we already have an upcoming rising star in Tyler Algier. I feel like he could really take over Atlanta's running game in the next 2 to 3 years. So I wouldn't really like Bijan Robinson, but as you said, he is one good of a prospect. So I wouldn't be completely mad at that, but I have the Atlanta Falcons taking either Tyree Wilson or Jalen Carter, one of them, or even like you said, Nolan Smith out of Georgia. He isn't one of the best players in the draft, but he is up there, and I wouldn't be mad with any of those picks. And I've heard rumors about Tennessee trying to trade up with Atlanta, so maybe we trade back to 11 and take one of the guys over there.
Yeah, and speaking of trading back, I've heard a lot of rumors about the Saints trading back as well. So I've heard that either the Saints will try to trade up if someone's there or trade back if, no one that they want is up there. So, Ross, do you see the Saints actually making a pick at 29, or do you think they trade back and get another 2nd round pick?
I wouldn't put any stock in the idea of them trading back until they actually do it. When you look at the New Orleans Saints, they haven't traded back since 2007. They traded back in 2006 twice. They did get in 2007, and they've never traded back ever since then. And that's not to say that they wouldn't. You're right. Mickey Loomis has told us over and over again that he, isn't averse to the idea of trading back. It's just that the value has to be there. And maybe a team like Green Bay gets froggy now that they've got a couple of different second round picks. I traded back Aaron and I, we did our locked on mock draft. I traded back because the Detroit Lions were crazy enough to offer me 2 second-round picks for a bottom of the first round selection. So like that was easy. But I think when you look at the actual, trend of the New Orleans Saints, I don't know if there's really necessarily been enough like heat around the idea of them trading back. It's just a lot of people exploring the possibility of what it would look like if the Saints did finally trade back. And this would be a good draft class to do it, because the real kind of heft of this draft is second, third, fourth rounds, in my opinion. And so I like the idea of trading back. I don't know if the Saints do it, but I would be jazzed if they did. I would be super excited if they did, because I think then you have the ability then to really get a lot more. You mentioned that win now mentality that they've sort of had over the course of the offseason. They can continue to build off of that in the draft. I think that it's more likely that they trade up or stand pat and stick and pick at 29. But they would have to trade up specifically for a prospect that they like. I think either of the Clemson guys like Miles Murphy or Brian Brzee could be worthy of that, but I don't think it's going to be a big trade up. It's not going to be a 2018 Marcus Davenport situation, I don't think. I would expect it to be more like a calling your old buddies at the Jacksonville Jaguars potentially trade to 24, or your buddies over in Los Angeles with the Chargers to potentially trade up to 21. And so those would be the spots that I could see them potentially jumping up, but I don't know that it's going to be a leap into the teens like we've seen in previous years.
Yeah, the Saints have obviously been very aggressive in the draft, trading up. But like you just said, a player I would love to see the Saints draft is Miles Murphy. I feel like he would be a great fit with this team. Bringing some more to the pass rushing. They're losing Marcus Davenport. Obviously, he didn't have a great year last year, ended up signing with the Minnesota Vikings, but definitely I could see that being a good replacement for him on the edge, along with Cam Jordan. Maybe even an eventual, replacement for Cam Jordan, as he's obviously getting older, and then you can put someone like Peyton Turner if you have enough trust in him on the other edge. He was a first-round pick just like 2 years ago, so obviously he still has a lot of potential.
Carl Granderson, right? Like, Carl Granderson's had an outstanding. I mean, he was stealing starts from Marcus Davenport at the end of last season. So I know he's undrafted and he's on a first round selection, but I wouldn't be surprised if Carl Granderson has a larger role in the future too, if he sticks around on the team at least.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Obviously, the Saints, I feel like if they can get a guy like a Miles Murphy, then their pass rushing future honestly will look pretty bright. Obviously they're one of the oldest teams in the league, but still getting some younger guys like that would definitely help out. Another guy I would like to see the Saints draft is Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. Obviously, the running back need, the Saints kind of need one now that Alvin Kamara could be facing suspension. Ended up signing Jamal Williams in free agency. I thought that was an excellent signing for the Saints. But Jahmyr Gibbs, definitely a guy just like Alvin Kamara. I feel like they have a very similar play style and could be an eventual replacement for Alvin Kamara. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you've got both Jamal Williams and Alvin Kamara, who are 29 years old going into 2023. So, the NFL tends to turn its nose up at running backs that are 30 plus. And so having a guy ready for your succession plan makes a ton of sense. And I think Jahmyr Gibbs, along with a couple of other options that are maybe later in the draft, but, if you've got Jahmyr Gibbs sitting there at 40 at the top of the second round, or you decide to move up early in the second round, then I think, that's a hard one to say no to for sure. And I think the Saints would be warranted in that selection for sure.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to get to, obviously this doesn't really have a I guess wouldn't say a big impact, I guess, on the Saints or the Falcons, but obviously Aaron Rodgers traded yesterday to the New York Jets. I know you talked about this today on your show, Ross, about how this could impact the Saints. But overall, like, what are you guys' thoughts on the entire trade?
On the whole, like on the trade as a whole, or the impact for the Saints?
It's
kind of the trade as a whole. Yeah, I mean, look, I think the trade as a whole, I give the nod early to the New York Jets because they went and got their guy. I just mentioned that I love when a team identifies the quarterback that they want and they go out and then they get their guy. I think it's all Tom Brady's fault because Tom Brady change teams at 40, went off and won a Super Bowl somewhere, or 40 plus went off and ran a Super Bowl somewhere. And then now the NFL believes that quarterbacks can play until they're 83. But we'll see exactly what happens with Aaron Rodgers when he gets over to New York. But I love for them that they just went and got their guy. And I don't think that the Green Bay Packers got fleeced in any sense of the imagination at all. It makes you wonder if the Jets had any leverage whatsoever. And so, I think this kind of comes out great for both. We'll see what Green Bay does with all the selections. Them moving up to 13 puts them in prime position to be able to move up for the top wide receiver off the board, perhaps. And it distances them in terms of the impact of the Saints. It distances them a little bit further so that they can't, the Saints aren't calling them up saying, hey, can we get to 15? It's a little bit harder to get to 13, especially if a quarterback ends up falling. And we're seeing more and more conversation about that right now. And then, they get 2 second-round picks now, where they a team that wants to get back into the first round to grab another, big-time pass catcher for Jordan Love or something like that. And would the Saints be willing to entertain that? So I think there's that. And also now Aaron Rodgers is off the schedule for them, and they've seen pretty much Aaron Rodgers the last time in his career at this point, because the Jets will be on the schedule in 2025. But the last time that they saw him, they mollywopped him for a 38-3 win, and I think they'll let that ride off into the sunset, hopefully, and never have to see Aaron Rodgers again.
Yeah.
Sorry,
you could go.
I was just going to say, I think the trade makes sense for both teams. I still think Aaron Rodgers is probably one of the 6 or 7 best quarterbacks in the league. The question when you're the Jets is, how long is he going to play? And, to basically give up, a potential first round pick for the possibility that, Aaron Rodgers may retire after one season, would be kind of a tough pill to swallow. But obviously the Jets are sort of all in on this kind of year and trying to get the most out of that. So it makes sense for both sides. And obviously Green Bay, I think at this point, was just kind of over the Aaron Rodgers experience, as I think a lot of people were, myself included. The drama could have done with a little bit less over the last 2 years when it came to Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. But he loves the attention. As for how it affects the Falcons, the Jets are one of those teams that a lot of people have been penciling them in for an offensive tackle. And, there's been some talk, I don't know how much has been as of late, that they may be looking to move up and, jumping ahead of a team like Chicago or Philadelphia, Tennessee, all these teams that are potentially in the market for an offensive lineman makes sense. And so I think if you're the Falcons, you do want to potentially explore that possibility if the Jets come calling about moving back in the draft. And the fact that they go from 13 to 15 means they probably have to give up a little bit more draft capital than they initially were going to have to do. Maybe throw in an extra 4th round pick in addition to the day 2 selection that they may wind up giving you for the Falcons. And so I think it works out in the Falcons' favor if that is a move that the Jets want to do, to come up and get their offensive tackle. And that would be a perfect opportunity for the Falcons to potentially move back, to the 15 spot. And I think there will be, in the world where they do take a Bijan Robinson, I think there will be a lot less complaints about taking him at 15 than there will be at 8. There'll still be plenty of complaints about taking him, period. But that's just the way it goes when it comes to the draft. Everybody loves or hates every draft pick in the immediate future, and obviously time will tell. But I think if you could move back 7 spots, pick up, let's say, a 3rd and a 4th round pick that could be used to address some of those more pressing issues that Dabir was talking about in spots. That makes a ton of sense. So I like this trade because it does potentially open the door for the Falcons to get a more favorable trade back on draft night, if that's the case.
Yeah, like you said, doesn't really impact both of our teams, but this could really, the Jets could really just come calling at us, come trade with us 15, add some more draft capital to the Atlanta Falcons, which would be nice for us because, like you said, we could really just take Bijan Robinson if he falls past the Eagles, and we could take him at number 15 if the Jets trade with us. It's going to add draft capital. It's going to just help us become a better team in general. Aaron Rodgers trade, like you said, he could retire in one season. He could play for another 2. We don't know about that. I personally think he will retire after the season. So I don't know if a 1st round pick was necessary, but it is what it is. We've been hearing the rumors for the past 1 to 2 years, and it is finally over with. So I wouldn't say this is a win-win situation. This is a win-win situation for both teams. I wouldn't say, somebody completely got fleeced. It's a win-win situation for both teams. Aaron Rodgers needed to get out of Green Bay. He finally did. And for the Green Bay position at quarterback, I feel like they start Jordan Love and see what he can do for this season. Or maybe take a quarterback like Hendon Hooker in day 2 from Tennessee. Maybe try to develop him. But there are a lot of options for the Green Bay Packers right now.
Yeah, I think the trade somewhat influences the Saints a little bit more as well because it just makes the NFC weaker. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers was a 2-time MVP, in the last 3 years. So obviously the Saints, with their win now mentality, have a higher chance of winning the NFC. Obviously, I wouldn't say like they're a favorite or anything, but definitely it's going to be easier without a Hall of Fame quarterback, a future Hall of Fame quarterback in the conference. Obviously with Jordan Love, who hasn't really shown or proven anything yet. But it'll be interesting, maybe the Packers can pull off like a Seahawks type season with Jordan Love as their Geno Smith. So we'll see what happens, going into the future. But obviously, Dabir, this is something me and you have talked about since the start of the podcast of when is Aaron Rodgers going to get traded, and he finally gets traded now. But another move that's going to definitely shake up the NFC South and definitely influence the NFC South more is going to be the Panthers selection at number 1. So Will Levis's odds to be the number 1 pick have jumped up dramatically over the past day or so. Bryce Young is now the heavy favorite to be that pick. Will Levis is the second favorite. So I'm assuming the Panthers are going to go ahead and take Bryce Young. Do you guys agree? Do you think they're going to take someone else? And if so, what are your thoughts on the Panthers picking their new QB at first overall?
What I'll say is I hope they take somebody other than Bryce Young.
For real.
Please take Will Levis, take Anthony Richardson. I'd still be very worried about CJ Stroud there, but
I'd be a little more worried about CJ Stroud, actually, personally.
But yeah, I think Bryce Young is a home run pick. He's a safe pick at that quarterback spot. That's why he makes the most sense. Will Levis is a little polarizing, so it has been interesting to see that is the guy that at least the odds makers think is the secondary option when for a month since they made that move from 9 to 1, it's been either Stroud or Young, and so that's an interesting development this week. I don't know if the odds makers are basically trying to steal people's money by getting them to bet on something other than I think the last time I saw the odds, it was like minus 1,000 for Bryce Young to be the number 1 pick. So they have to kind of throw another name out there just so people will put money on it. Because, if you bet, you got to bet 1,000 in order to win 100 with
a lot of people passing
odds.
on that.
Yeah. So, I hope the Panthers go in a different direction, but I do think Bryce Young, I think if he hits his ceiling and his potential, the player I perceive him to be is basically a melding of Drew Brees and Russell Wilson, right? The precision of Drew Brees, but the ability to make plays off structure like we saw Russell Wilson make for years. And, that can create a lot of headaches for defenses in the NFC South for many years to come if that comes to fruition, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I definitely
agree
with you. I definitely agree with you there that I don't want the Panthers taking Bryce Young. I wanted them to take Will. I was actually excited when I saw Will Levis's odds go up. I'm not a high believer on Will Levis. I was definitely hoping, or I guess I still am hoping, that the Panthers take him first. Obviously, Dabir, I thought that CJ Stroud was going to be the first overall pick, but it's looking like that's not even going to be an option anymore for the Panthers, at least according to odds makers. So do you think that the Panthers still have any interest in taking anyone else besides Bryce Young?
No, not really. I mean, Will Levis could be an option, but I'd be really happy because we'd have to place we'd have to play, both of us would have to play Will Levis 2 times a year instead of Bryce Young. Like, come on, who doesn't want that? I'm not a really high believer, like you said, on Will Levis. I think he's going to be that bust type of quarterback this draft. So yeah, but I think the Panthers go ahead, take the safe option, go ahead, take Bryce Young, quarterback from Alabama. Obviously, his height comes into consideration, but I think it is what it is. I think they go with the safer route. Go ahead, take Bryce Young, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely a proven quarterback over there at Alabama, showing that he definitely deserves to be that number one pick. Um, some other teams that, obviously need a quarterback are, the Raiders, the Colts, but obviously those don't really influence our teams as much. Another team that does influence our division is the Buccaneers, who are kind of like in the opposite boat of the Panthers. They're, completely rebuilding. They're not going for their number one pick now. They're going for, Baker Mayfield, trying to develop a guy like a Kyle Trask. I don't know that they really want Kyle Trask as their future. I'm not really a high believer on Kyle Trask either. He hasn't really done anything in the few moments that he's played in the NFL. But they do go ahead and sign Baker Mayfield. He struggled really badly with the Panthers last season, then, kind of caught on with the Rams before signing with the Bucs. So do you guys think that the Bucs are going to be, dead last in this division, as a lot of people think that they will?
That's a tough one. I think for me, it depends on how much or how quickly the rookie quarterback for Carolina transitions, right? Like how quickly that transition takes place, whether that's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, or Will Levis, whoever it might be. I think that it's entirely dependent upon how quickly that quarterback makes his transition to the NFL. So I would put it up there. The thing that I am interested in, though, is if the Bucs trade back in the first round and let a team get into the teens and all that for some future draft capital, then I think you're looking at a team that's going to start to stockpile some of its future assets to try to get up in next year's draft to solve their quarterback issue. Guys like Drake May, of course, there's a guy like Caleb Williams there. We'll see how that goes. But, you've got really three very, very good quarterbacks and potentially more depending upon the transition of guys like, the kid from that used to be at Oklahoma and now he's somewhere else. I can't remember his name, but Spencer Rattler. And so like you have these guys that, could potentially be there for them next year that could help them with their quarterback situation. I agree with you. I don't think that Kyle Trask is the future of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I don't think that Baker Mayfield is all of a sudden no longer Baker Mayfield. So I think there's a good chance they end up at the bottom of the division, but that could be upset by how tough that transition is for the rookie quarterback coming in at Carolina.
Yeah, for me, when I look at the Buccaneers, I think the rest of their roster is still pretty solid. I think you probably, if you remove the quarterback from the conversation, I think you can make a pretty easy argument that the Bucs still probably have the most stacked roster in the division. And I do think, I'm assuming Baker Mayfield will win that competition over Kyle Trask in training camp. We didn't see a lot of great play from Baker Mayfield last year in Carolina. We did see some very promising things from him with the Rams. And so the question is, which version of Baker Mayfield are you going to get? And I think it's reasonable that the Bucs, I wouldn't pick them to win the division, but I think they'll be competitive. I think the NFC South is basically going to have like 4 teams between 6 and 9 wins. You'll probably get the last place team finishing 6 and 11, and the first place team finishing 9 and 8, and the 2 middle teams, with 7 and 8 wins respectively. So I think Tampa Bay will definitely be in the mix there. But yeah, I think this is kind of a transition year for them. Getting out of the Tom Brady situation, trading some players. They were successfully able to retain several players that I was convinced that they were going to lose. Talking with the Locked On Bucs host David Harrison at the Senior Bowl, he was basically like Levante David and Jamel Dean and all these guys are probably gone, and they were able to retain a bunch of those guys. So that was notable to me. So I think Tampa Bay will be feistier than people probably give credit, that are just going to write them off simply because they've made a major downgrade at the quarterback position. But I think the rest of the roster in that defense is good enough that they'll be competitive, assuming that they can get decent quarterback play out of Baker Mayfield and or Kyle Trask.
Yeah, like he said, it's going to be a competition. They still have wide receiver Mike Evans and wide receiver Chris Godwin. They have a pretty good stacked team. we just got to see who wins the battle between Baker and Kyle. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be Baker Mayfield over Kyle Trask. We haven't seen much out of training camp. But, yeah, like Mr. Aaron said, the Buccaneers are going to shock some people. And I still think they're going to be the worst team in the NFC South this year. I definitely think the Saints or Atlanta Falcons might take it over them. But yeah, this is like a a transform year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and if they can get good play out of Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask, they could really be like a shocker team coming out of this season.
Yeah, some things to consider as well with that is that the Falcons actually have the easiest schedule in the entire NFL going into next season, with the Saints having the second easiest schedule in the entire NFL going into next season. So both of these teams obviously having extremely easy schedules. With the Panthers, like you said, depends on how quickly the rookie can transition. It also depends on, if they're going to let Andy Dalton probably start, at least the first couple games of the season. So all of that will obviously influence the standings in the division. I think that the Saints are going to win this division just because they're, like I said, a lot the oldest team. They have the most experience. I just think that their roster right now is better than the others. I'm not saying they're going to win by a long shot, but I just think, if they can get 10 wins, they're probably going to win this division pretty easily. So I definitely think those factors come into play when talking about who's going to win this division. I don't know that the Saints can win, a bunch of playoff games. They're like the fourth favorite to win the NFC and go to the Super Bowl. I don't think that's going to happen with teams like the Eagles still in there, the Cowboys still in the mix. But, obviously those things will influence the standings in the division. I don't know how hard the Buccaneers schedule is, but that can, like I said, influence where they finish. But another thing I wanted to talk about was the Lions actually having that, betting scandal. This really doesn't have much to do with the Saints or the Falcons, but I just wanted to get some opinions on it. I haven't really talked about it with anyone, but Lions betting scandal, I guess. What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, I was a little surprised to see the news because last year the Falcons had their own little issues with Calvin Ridley, and I think most of the world assumed, okay, well, Calvin Ridley was the one idiot that did the thing that you're not supposed to do, that everybody knows you're not supposed to do, that I'm sure when they do their rookie symposium, they spend only 3 minutes on at the beginning of, like, don't gamble on football, because they just assume that you're not going to be dumb enough to do it. And apparently a whole bunch of players for the Lions, including one player, Stanley Berryhill, who was with the Falcons last summer as part of their training camp. He was an undrafted free agent. So that was also interesting to sort of see that whole thing go down. And, my take is this, I thought last year was going to be the last time we would see this. I don't know if this year is going to be the last time that we're going to see this, because I just think the ease of which people can bet on games through their phone, just literally take 2 or 3 minutes and, put in a couple of bets, and all the downtime that NFL players have throughout the year, we'll probably see a couple of other people get hit with this. And, I'm sure at this year's rookie symposium, they'll probably spend more than 3 minutes talking about not gambling. And we'll see if, it sinks in for those players.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm surprised Calvin Ridley gets a year and Jameson Williams and the other people only get 5 to 6 games. I thought they were going to get a year, but we all know Calvin Ridley's suspension was a bit harsh for that 1 full year suspension. But I'm surprised. I was shocked to see the news about Jameson Williams is one of the biggest names in that gambling scandal. So surprise! I'm pretty sure the Lions released everyone who was involved in that gambling stuff instead of Jameson Williams. So yeah, Lions were not going to deal with that bull crap.
Yeah, honestly, I think that, I don't know that players should be getting suspended for that long just for betting on sports that aren't even football, just on NFL facilities. But, it's the NFL's rules. It is what it is. You have to respect it. So obviously those players get suspended. I guess everything in the league kind of has an effect on our teams. Obviously, kind of affects the Lions, and the NFC could kind of shake things up, but I don't really see it making a huge impact. The Lions obviously were actually a pretty good team last year, winning 9 games. Obviously lost Jamal Williams to the Saints, but ended up signing David Montgomery. So all in all, it is what it is. Doesn't really affect our teams. Just something I wanted to talk about. But yeah, on that note, that pretty much wraps things up. Covered everything about our team, covered the draft, covered, the offseason. So that'll pretty much do it. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for having us.
No problem.